All righty. All right. Well, we are hitting noon central on the dot, so I am going to get started. Just want to make sure that we're being timely for all of you today. Let's make sure I'm sharing my correct screen here as well. All right. Hopefully we are. So hopefully everyone is doing well today. I know we're kind of getting slammed with a blizzard up here in Wisconsin. So I know a lot of you are in Illinois, Chicagoland. Hopefully you don't have to do much traveling today and you get to stay home and stay warm. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Lucas Amell. I'll do a little intro in a second, but I'm really excited to be here today with all of you and to discuss building a budget. This has been an ongoing part of our employee financial well-being educational series. We're putting these on for Optum Health, Children's of Wisconsin, as well as the whole Aurora Advocate system. So I'm really happy to have you guys here. We've done this presentation, I think, every year for the past 3 years now, and it's very, very popular. I work in the financial space as a financial planner, and I would say that this is arguably one of the biggest issues that I see with people of all walks of life, right? Is having a budget, having understanding on what our cash flow looks like. So we're going to kind of dive into that today, give you some tips, some tricks, some things to avoid. And hopefully you're able to get some golden nuggets from the presentation that you can apply to your own life. So now a budget, in summary, right? A budget is going to help you decide where to spend or allocate your money and whether you can spend less money on some things or even more money on other things. You really cannot accurately make decisions regarding your cash flow without some kind of a budget or understanding of where our money is going. Okay. So a little bit about me for those of you that don't know or need a refresher, because it's everybody's favorite topic, me, right? My name is Lucas Abel. I have a bachelor's in personal finance from Carroll University up here in Waukesha, Wisconsin. In terms of experience, I've been in the industry coming up on 9 years now. I've worked in estate planning centric firms. I've worked in tax planning centric firms, as well as financial planning centric firms, which is kind of where I am now, integrating all the different things that I'm seeing. So coming from a background of having considerable knowledge on taxes, financial planning, estate planning, it really helps me to be able to better work with individuals as they're, seeking guidance, as they're trying to piece together this ever confusing roadmap of, personal finance as well as retirement. So my why, ultimately, why I do what I do is I just see such a need for it. Right. I've met with people of all walks of life, from 20-year-olds just trying to get started to, maybe people in their 40s, mid-career trying to plot out retirement, to people who are retiring or retired. And it's astounding how few of these people have been educated on how personal finance works, how, different accounts operate and how they commingle with one another, and how all of these things should be integrated into a full comprehensive plan. But I'm seeing that there's a very big lack of people that do what I do to help people have clarity and confidence with their future, right? So my organization, and then we'll jump into the meat and potatoes of it. You can kind of see it on the right here. It's kind of a thing within a thing of a thing, right? So me, myself, I am a solo practitioner, a fully licensed financial planner. I'm representing people all over the country. Now, I'm on a team, collectively between me and my two business partners, we're overseeing over, $250 million. That's the Lettenberger thing there. We're also a part of an agency, so that's the West Point Financial Group. It's one of the largest financial representative agencies in the entire country. So we're spanning and cover, people all over the Midwest. So Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. We're kind of branching into Atlanta now. So all over, but ultimately the mothership, the parent company is Mass Mutual. So a lot of people in the Midwest, they're a little more familiar with Northwestern Mutual because, you know, if you live in Milwaukee, their building kind of dominates our skyline. Mass Mutual, kind of the same thing. It's just the East Coast version. It's a big financial conglomerate. They do insurance, they do financial stuff, all that. But you didn't come here to talk about me or to learn about me as much. You came to learn about budgeting. So we'll get into that. But since I talked so much about who I am not. I am not a CPA, nor am I an attorney. So none of what we're covering today should be considered specific tax advice, legal advice, or even financial advice. It's meant to be general in nature. Everything that we're going to be covering and talking about today is going to be general in nature. So just trying to give you guys some tips and tricks, right? Let me put my phone on do not disturb because I got way too many texts and emails in the 5 minutes that I've already been talking. So, so to recap, for those of you, if this is your first webinar or, you know, you're newer to the series, you know, this is what everything's going to be tying back to is this concept of financial well-being. So as we just start our discussion on budgeting, I do want to point out, you know, where budgeting goes hand in hand with our overall financial well-being. So understanding what we mean when we're saying financial well-being can really help put everything that we're going to discuss today into better context for you. Okay, so financial well-being can be defined by, first of all, having control over our day-to-day finances. Now, that's really what we're going to be talking about in length today. Okay, so having a budget, a lot of people don't, unfortunately. Second, having the capacity to absorb a financial shock. Okay, so this is really important when it comes to your financial wellness. It's basically having an emergency fund, right? Do you have maybe 2, 3, even 4 months of income set aside in like a high yield savings account that if something happens, if you get hurt and you can no longer work, if you get laid off and your income's not as consistent, where can you kind of turn to continue what you're used to from a household income standpoint? It's very important to have that emergency fund. We'll kind of talk about how to get one of those set up and saved for. The third pillar here of financial well-being is being on track to meet our financial goals, right? So arguably, one of the best ways to be on track to meet your financial goals is to have financial goals. So this is something that, you know, I see all the time with folks. You know, one of the biggest things that I need to ask everybody I talk to is, okay, well, like, when do you want to retire? And what does it look like? And a lot of people have a lot more trouble with that question. You know, everybody says, oh, I want to retire as soon as possible. Yeah, I get that, but how much income do you want? Do you want to live where you're living now? Do you want to relocate? Do you want to downsize? You know, like, you need to really paint a picture of what retirement looks like or what financial well-being looks like to you. So we do an entire presentation on financial goal setting. I probably have at this point 3 or 4 of them fully recorded. So if you really want to watch that and learn more about financial goal setting, shoot me an email and I can just send you a prior recording of that. Lastly, the fourth pillar of financial well-being here is having the financial freedom that's going to allow you to make the choices that you want to make to live the life that you want to live, right? So ultimately, this is kind of encompassing all the other ones, but not having to stress out about taking a vacation or, you know, moving residences or buying a home. If everything is enveloped within this financial well-being kind of a compass or a roadmap, you're going to be good because, hey, maybe you need to buy a new car, right? Having this financial freedom to make choices that allow you to live your life. Maybe you retired, you want to buy a car, a new car, you haven't had a new car in a long time. Well, if you have an understanding of what your budget is, you know you have an emergency fund, and you know you're on track to meet your goals, especially with the addition of this purchase, guess what? It's way easier and less stressful to purchase a car knowing everything's wrapped together nicely, right? So let's jump into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be covering today, right? So here's our agenda. No, we're going to be talking all about budgeting, right? So budgeting, at the end of the day, budgeting is going to help you make informed decisions about your finances. Okay. So for some people, maintaining a budget's a lot simpler than you might think. However, for other people, it's going to be a very difficult chore to make sure that there's enough money to pay the bills, whether it's, an inconsistent income, whether it's just you've got a lot of stuff floating around and you need to just start hunting things down, or, our expenses change. That's a very common thing, but having a budget and starting to track it over a period of time, you should have a general understanding of what's coming in, what's going out, and where that money that's going out is all going. Okay. So, like most things in life, your success at budgeting is going to be measured by your effort, right? The more effort that you put into tracking your cash flow, the more of a benefit that you're going to see, and the more that your budget's going to kind of piece itself together. So today we are going to talk about some things that you may want to consider when creating your own budget. What we'll talk about today is intended to be a guideline. So only you, based on your situation, can decide what's going to be the best approach for you. So, looking at our agenda here, we're going to look at our income, the various sources of it. We're going to talk about how to track your spending. We're going to talk about ways that we can understand and categorize the different expenses that you and your household are going to have. And then also, we're going to talk about preparing for the unexpected. So like I had said before, talking a little bit about having that emergency fund, kind of building one up, we'll give you some guidance, tips, and tricks on what we see people having success with that. So into our first action item here, assessing our income. So to start a budget, you need to know your individual income, your household, your combined household income, and if applicable, understanding how much money you have to work with within your budget. So really knowing those inflows. Okay. So we need to determine the amount of your take home, so our after-tax pay, from 3 different perspectives. We find that it's important. So looking at, of course, our average annual income, our average monthly income, and what our average weekly income is. Now, if there's another income in your household, that of course should be considered in your budget, right? So spouse, whatever that looks like. Make sure that it's included. It's important not to do budgeting in a silo, because typically most households don't go operate in silos. If yours does, then do 2 separate budgets. That's totally fine too. So this can include other income too, just to be clear. So if you have rental properties, if you have hobbies that you earn an income from, those are just some examples that it can also be counted as income. So it's sometimes outside of our primary income, which would be a salary. So if your income varies, perhaps seasonally, or at the end of the year you get a big bonus, try to really keep track of those changes and plan your annual and monthly budgets accordingly. A lot of people struggle with that. I see, a couple instances of that where, people are very much over withholding on like their tax returns, and then they'll get a huge tax return for like, multiple thousands of dollars. That is a budgeting thing that sometimes you need to take into consideration. And then same with what I had already mentioned about the big bonuses. I see a lot of people with that where, they'll get a big bonus, but then it's a little more difficult to budget that throughout the course of the year, because as humans, we have this beautiful tendency of like, if we see it, we spend it. And it's really easy to do that. So sometimes having a big lump sum of cash injected into your bank is not always easy to budget for. But I promise you, if you kind of follow what we're talking about today, and really holding yourself to a strict budgeting standard, it can become a lot easier, right? We stuck on this one. There we go. All right. So we want to track our spending, right? So once you understand what our total income is from all different sources, you need to spend at least an entire month tracking every single penny that you spend. It's a challenge that I have for you. Honestly, this is the only way that you're going to be able to get a complete understanding of how much money is going out of the door each and every day, each and every month, each and every year. It's very important to understand what's coming in and what's going out. From there, we can start talking about, tracking, but we'll get to it. So I've seen people have a lot of success with this kind of like little homework assignment or fun money challenge. I've seen a lot of success come from people using apps like on a smartphone. Just use some apps to track your expenses on the go. Actually, a lot of credit cards or banks have these built in where they will tell you and they'll break down and categorize, hey, you're spending this much on food, this much on travel, this much on gas. It's very helpful to be able to see this and really start tracking, okay, what am I spending my money on? Every time you spend money, make a little note, whether it's on an app, whether it's in a notepad, something. Really start to keep track of how your spending is, because typically what we see is that if you do this for about 30 days, the next 30 days are not going to be that substantially different. Humans are creatures of habit, and we typically adhere to very similar routines, very similar patterns, both in how we spend our time, but also too how we spend our money. Okay, so keep in mind that the last 30 days may not account for variable spending, in other months. So for example, you're maybe going to be spending more during the holiday months, so November, December. Or two, hey, maybe you have a big vacation coming up this month or something like that. Get away from the cold a little bit. There's going to be a little bit of a fluctuation, but like if you can get a solid 30-day snapshot of just you doing your normal thing, there's no holidays, there's no big vacations, just trying to get an understanding of what your day-to-day life actually costs. Okay. Understanding our expenses. So continuing on with that, now that we have an understanding of what our income looks like, what our expenses look like, next, we need to really understand those expenses. So kind of taking it a level further here. Now, break them up into two main types of expenses and really consider, these when you're looking and assessing your budget. So we're going to have fixed expenses and we are going to have variable expenses, right? So fixed expenses are going to be our expenses that they're not going to fluctuate every month. Maybe they tick up with inflation, but this is going to be stuff like our mortgage or rent, our car leases or loans, any kind of insurance premiums that we might have. These costs are going to be very consistent. The payments are going to be due every month and they should not change substantially. Okay. But the other type of expense that we need to kind of keep our eyes on is this variable expense component. Okay. So as you can see on the slides, variable expenses are going to be expenses that they can change depending on your habits, your lifestyle, right? So that can be grocery bill. Honestly, we're seeing that a lot. At least I am with the conversations that I'm having with people over the past year and a half with what's going on with inflation. That, grocery bills have gone up substantially over the past year and a half. That's considered a variable expense. Same with what we spend on clothes, same with car maintenance. There's a myriad of variable expenses, but these are things that they're controlled. I kind of like to break it up almost to, when it comes to fixed and variable. Fixed is kind of more so like keeping a roof over your head, like that's like our base lifestyle, like giving you a place to live. Variable is almost everything else, truthfully. But, we'll show you a budget sheet later on. Everybody that signs up for this webinar will receive a budget worksheet that they can kind of plug and play. I found that it's been very, very useful for a lot of individuals when they're just trying to get started on this. And one thing too, just to know, when it comes to budgeting, everyone, it's never a perfect thing. It's similar to a financial plan. It's a working document, right? It's going to change over time. It's going to grow with you. So it's important to just have an understanding of what it looks like initially, so you can start tweaking it over time. Okay. So now we need to, now that we understand our expenses, it's helpful to kind of categorize them, right? So once you have all the expenses accounted for, you can categorize our spending into three different distinct groups. Okay. Living, our wants, and debt. Okay. So our living expenses, that's going to be things like our housing, like our food, our utilities, clothes, gas, insurance, etc. Right. So that's stuff that it kind of keeps the engine of your life going, right? Now, our wants, that's going to be things that we're spending money on that are kind of for you and for your loved ones, but they're not necessary to sustain life. Okay. So this can be like fancy dinners out, various types of entertainment, so movies, concerts, travel, etc. Lastly, our third category here is going to be debt, right? So this can include money that we're spending each month on any kind of debt payment. So student loans, credit cards, auto loans, mortgages, there's all types of debt. It's everybody's favorite thing, right? So when we're looking at it and we start to categorize these expenses, the way that we should try to overlay our budget with them, right, is about this 50-30-20 ratio, or at least that's what none of this is like a commandment, right? But it's a general rule of thumb within the financial world. Okay, that about 50% of our spending should go towards our living expenses. Okay, so remember, that's mortgage, rent, the basics for our life. 30% of our monthly income should go to wants. So remember, that's kind of like our entertainment, our travel fund. And then 20% of what we're dealing with, that should be going towards paying down our debts, right? So that should be going towards managing vehicle expenses, that should be going towards our mortgage, all those different things. So this 50-30-20 rule of thumb is simply a guideline for you to use when you're creating a budget. Now, people are going to spend according to their preferences and their abilities, but this 50-30-20, it's a very good place to start with a general understanding. Your numbers might not be exactly perfectly that. They're going to be skewed a little bit, but this is a pretty reasonable way to expect them. So once you've tracked your expenses, created your budget, you can kind of begin to adjust the numbers to best suit your individual circumstances. Like I said, now only you, based on your personal situation, can decide what's the best approach to budgeting that's going to make the most sense for you. This 50-30-20 thing may work for Joe, but the 50-30-20 thing might look a lot different for Steve. Okay. It's just a general guideline. Okay. All right. So continuing categorizing our expenses. Now, of course, we cannot forget savings. Okay. So we call this part paying yourself first. And it's just as important as paying your bills when it comes to having a strong financial foundation. Right. So for that reason, include savings in that 50% living expense category that we just talked about. You should think of saving as a line item in your budget. Okay. Think of it as a necessary expense. Even though the money is going into your own savings vehicle, you're more likely to keep up with setting that money aside if you're considering it a fixed line item in your budget. You're still pre-retiree accumulating assets for retirement. You want to hold yourself accountable. I have seen it so many times where people do not have a fixed savings plan or an automatic savings plan, and they just say, yeah, Lucas, I'll put money into my Roth at the end of every month based on how much money I have left. Well, I find that very often when people have that mentality, they don't have money left at the end of every month because they keep pushing off like, I'll save next month, or, oh, there was this thing this month that came up. It's way better if you're holding yourself accountable to a savings schedule by considering your savings as a fixed line item expense. Okay, so for planning purposes, you really should target your savings to be about 10% of your monthly take-home income. Not everybody can get there. I really am an advocate for that. I've seen it really, really do wonders for people over the course of their savings years, right? Let's continue. All right, so keeping within our budget, right? So once we set a monthly budget, whether it's 50, 30, 20, or whatever your numbers look like, understand that this is not a one-time event, okay? Budgeting is a process that will be continuous and ever evolving, ever changing throughout your lifetime, right? So review your budget regularly so that you can think critically about which line items can be lowered, which line items can be raised, what line items you can completely eliminate. One of the things that I see all the time meeting with people and really walking them through a budgeting exercise is that they spend a lot of money on stuff that they don't use. When we really track it and look at every dollar that leaves their bank account, it'll be like, oh, here's a subscription. I'll give you my personal examples. I have a subscription to Audible, right? I've been paying them $15, $20 a month every month for the past year. I think I only used it the first 2 months that I signed up because I wanted to listen to a couple different audiobooks, and then I finished it, and I'm still paying $20 a month. See, even financial planners aren't perfect when it comes to budgeting, but there's a laundry list of stuff like that a lot of people have, whether it's old channels that they don't watch on television anymore, old magazine or podcast subscriptions, all these little things, and they seem little initially, where it's because everything's on a subscription service nowadays, where it's like, hey, here's $5 a month, or hey, this is only $10 a month. But then you have 15 things set up like that, and then you're just in trouble, right? So it's important to try to eliminate some of the things. And next, we'll talk about being prepared. Sorry, I was choking there for a second on nothing. So preparing for the unexpected. This is hugely important. So as we look at building a budget earlier, we kind of categorized our expenses by whether they were living, they were wants, or they were debts, right? So we may also want to look at our budget in a different light so we can be as prepared as possible for when the unexpected things in life happen. Okay, so this time we kind of want to break up our expenses in a different way. So this is another way to do it. So categorizing our expenses for ourselves, for our families, for our community, and for our career. All right. So how we're kind of going to break this down, and this really helps with the unexpected aspect, and I'll kind of show you an example here, is trying to put those expenses under these categories, right? So on the screen, you're going to see some different examples of types of things that would fall under each category. Okay, so for ourselves, for example, we're going to have hobbies. Maybe you're into photography and you like to buy new lenses or new photography equipment, or woodworking. You always need to keep buying new stuff and new tools. Fitness, gym memberships, right? Family, education costs, whether they're in school or you're saving for college. Insurance, whether it's health insurance, life insurance. The community category. So if you give, have any kind of charitable giving, or, you're a member of like some kind of networking organization, something like that. And then career, right? So we're looking at like various costs associated with professional development, any kind of certifications that you kind of want to pursue. And of course, work attire, right? So once we kind of have expenses broken up like that, it's very easy for us to start breaking things down when we need to alter our budget. So remember, a budget's just to kind of help guide our savings and our spending. Okay, so once you've been able to recategorize our spending this way, and I'll send this stuff to all of you, you all get a recording, so don't feel like you need to jot a bunch of notes down as I'm going through it. Like, I'll give you a workbook so you can do all this. But, now that we have this other lens to look at, by recategorizing our expenses, by ourselves, by our family, by our community, by our career, you're going to have a lot more confidence as well as competency to handle any future unexpected expenses. Okay, so let me explain here. You are now going to have reprioritized our spending. Okay, and by doing so, decisions about where to cut spending in a given month or period of months is to cover these unexpected expense may be a lot easier for you to make. Okay, so for example, spending on ourselves, it might often be less of a priority than, say, spending for your family that month, right? And maybe spending for your community is going to be a little less valuable in the moment than cutting expenses that might support our career. Okay, so based on your priorities for each category, you're now going to be able to make little adjustments to those lower priority expenditures to cover an unexpected cost. So let's say that your budget takes an unexpected $500 hit, right? So this is the example that's on the screen. You need to do some kind of car repair. It's always super fun, right? So since you've already prioritized your spending in this way, you're going to have a pretty good idea of where that money could come from before you even necessarily look at your budget. And knowing beforehand that the money will, like that, it's going to come from here, it's going to give you a lot more confidence that you can handle and absorb this financial shock, like we said in the pillars of financial wellness. So this is just going to give you more freedom to make the choices and helps you rely a lot less on your savings or even your emergency funds for these unexpected costs. So realistically, we need our $500. We can prioritize how we're going to get that. Maybe we need the $500. So in our example here, we're going to spend $200 less on ourselves that month. So maybe going back to my woodworking example, maybe one of the projects that we really wanted to get started on, we're going to push it back. We're not going to buy, our lumber this month. We're going to wait till next month until this car thing's cleared up. When it comes to family, hey, maybe we're not going to do that outing to Culver's this month because we had to do this big car repair. Hey, when it comes to community, hey, we're not going to go to that fancy charity gala this month. I've got to fix my car, stuff like that. So being able to break these things down and be able to prioritize them is going to give you just a lot more control and understanding of, hey, when stuff happens, we know how we can pivot our expenses to help cover or reduce the shock of that. Okay, so as I said, this is kind of a challenge that's out there for anyone. I'm more than happy to kind of hold your hand and walk you through the budgeting process, right? But really, start tracking your expenses in detail 30 days. Just do it for 30 days. After that period of time, you will be able to build a comprehensive budget, I would say. So another way to tackle this might be to just look back at every credit card or debit card statement that you've had for the last 12 months. At a minimum, that's going to be pretty eye-opening if you actually kind of hold a magnifying glass up and look at how you spend. A lot of people don't. A lot of people willfully don't, and they ignore it. Like how many of you have ever been on a vacation and you're like afraid to open your credit card statement or your debit card statement after? And how many of you don't look at what you spent the money on after? You just end up paying it back at your time. A lot of us. And honestly, finances can be scary. That's why we're here to help you. If you don't complete this, you're not going to have an accurate budget. So really have some method of tracking your expenses, whatever works for your lifestyle, whether it's reviewing previous statements of credit or, you hold yourself to this 30-day challenge. I wish I had prizes to give out to everybody that does it, but a lot of people do it, and that would really hurt my budget. So once you know your expenses, plan next month's expenses using whatever guideline you do, whether it's that 50-30-20 that we gave you, whether there's one that you think is a little more appropriate for yourself and your household. It is critical that the very first month that you have a budget, that you live within your means, right? So follow your budget. Do not take on additional debt. Do not buy a car. Do not start spending a bunch of money on credit cards instead of from your bank. This will help you make more informed decisions about any adjustments that you need to make regarding your future budget. Okay, so remember this 50-30-20 rule of thumb. It's just guidance. Only you can ultimately decide what the best approach to budgeting is going to be for your household. If you need help, please reach out to me. I'm very happy to kind of talk through cash flow with you. I think that truthfully, this is the most important part of financial planning, is having an understanding of your cash flow, what's coming in, what's going out, where it's going. Okay. So actively manage money and make a concerted effort to avoid impulse purchases. I think this is huge. I think Americans are terrible with this. Actually, I just think humans are terrible with impulsiveness. But in our defense, retail companies know how to suck our money out of us. They're really good at it. They hire teams of psychologists on how to get us to spend more money. But having a budget and sticking to it should help you with impulsive purchase decisions. If you go to a store holding a $50 bill and you say, hey, this is all I'm going to spend, well, and that's all you have, then it's all you're going to spend. But if you go into a store and you have that little plastic unlimited money card, it can get dangerous for a lot of people, especially who do not have financial discipline, right? So remember, using your own money is almost always going to be better than using somebody else's money. It may seem old fashioned to pay cash, but realistically, there's a lot of merits to using cash or even debit cards. And a lot of times now too, I'm seeing that it's a lot cheaper. I'm seeing that a lot, especially restaurants. The past couple of restaurants I've gone to, I've noticed that on their receipt, they even say like, hey, there's going to be a 3% charge if you use a credit card here. So they've always been paying for that. Now it's getting fronted to the consumer. So not only does using your own cash or your own debit card save you money in fees, but it's also holding you accountable to not spending more money than you have, which arguably is an epidemic in America. Because a lot of people, I've seen statistics on it. It's a crazy number. Like the average American household earns, like on a monthly basis, it's like $5,000 a month, but on average they spend about 6,200. So think about that. They make 5 grand, but they're spending 62. And that's the average. That's the average American household. So, it's a big issue with folks, this credit card world that we live in, the living above our means instead of below our means. Very few people live at their means. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox here. So identify the expenses that you don't need. We talked about that. So really understanding what can we reduce, what can we eliminate within our budget, really going through our budget's the primary tool that we can use for this. If you lay out every expense that you have throughout the course of the month, I can almost guarantee you that there'll be minimum one thing on the list where you're like, I don't even know what this is. Why am I paying for this? Oh, this is every month? What is this? Oh, this thing that I signed up for way back when. You'd be surprised. Right. And once you are able to free up some of that money from eliminating or reducing these expenses, you're going to get to use your budget to redirect that money to things that are more important to you. Right. So whether it's travel, whether it's saving more, whether it's paying off debt a little more quickly, a budget should not have as negative of a connotation as it does. It does have a very negative connotation for folks because they think of it as being like restrictive, right? A budget is not restrictive. A budget is a tool for you to be in control of your finances, okay? But you need a template to do that. That's what a budget's for. All right, finally, be flexible and be adaptable with your budget. Like I said, review it regularly and have a plan in place beforehand that's going to help you address any unexpected costs and their effects on your budget. So, with that, I'm going to close here. This is kind of the main bulk of what we needed to talk about. It's the importance of having a budget, right? So for everybody that is on this call or that signed up for the webinar, I'm going to send you a sample of our budget organizer that we use with all the people that we work with. It's yours free. Play with it. Take it. It helps break up all the different categories, stuff like that. I'll have some additional supporting documentation to send over to you guys too, like workbooks, etc. If you need help, whether it's creating a budget, whether it's, mapping out how to break up the expenses, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to sit down with you. We don't charge to chat about this kind of stuff. Sit down with you and hash out a budget for you. If you need help projecting out what that looks like in retirement, I'm more than happy to kind of look at that with you as well. So I am here too. I will have a little bit of time for questions. If you have a question, feel free to throw one into the box. I do have a meeting that I got to get off here for sure by 1. But if we don't have a huge amount of questions, I'll probably get rolling here. So I'll hang out for a little bit. But thank you all so much for attending this workshop on budgeting. I really look forward to doing next month. I forget what our next month is. It should be about a month from today. And I'll include it in my follow-up email for everybody too. What is that? Investments. So next month we're talking all about investments. So when you get a chance, sign up for that. You should get an email